on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to V.A.C. Roundtable number 61. And we are here with Morgan Fox. So we're continuing our discussions with the national organization with the reform of marijuana laws. And needless to say, to have the political director of NORML is a treat for us. As we know, there's a lot of things happening, and we come from it from a historical perspective, but the history really doesn't matter. What's happening is we are facing an unprecedented change in policy that we've never been at before, any of us. We have the President of the United States issuing talks for change, and HHS has decided to accommodate the discussion and has now balled it right into the DEA's court, which is something we're all anxiously awaiting. But of course, thank you, Morgan, for joining us this evening through your technical difficulties. And we're just gonna kind of jump right into it. And this question is one we ask everybody, and it has kind of multiple layers. So how did you originally come to cannabis? Such as, do you remember the first time you heard of it, first time you smoked it? Give us an understanding of that. And then, what made you go where you are today?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with y'all. And I've worked with a bunch of the folks on this call in various capacities throughout the years. So it's great to have this forum to, be able to chop it up with y'all. How did I come to cannabis? So, I mean, like a lot of other people, I started, consuming cannabis probably too young. I started, consuming when I was like 14, 15, something like that. And what really started my road down cannabis policy reform was, the first time I got busted, which I was like just on the cusp of being 18. So I had to, write a paper for the judge and the probation officer about like how evil cannabis is, and I had to cut off my my teenage multicolored skater cut, and look as square as possible so I could go in there and get my parents and a bunch of other people boosting me up so that I didn't get harsher penalties. But that was my first taste of it, and I was this is way safer than alcohol. I don't understand why I'm getting thrown under the bus here over this nonsense when all the captain of the football team's getting drunk every weekend, and zero consequences, even though coaches and teachers and whatnot know about it. Fast forward to college, I got busted a couple more times for a simple possession, and it was what it was. Going through probation and all that nonsense, and trying to use all the various methods to test clean or abstaining from cannabis in order to make sure that I met the conditions of probation and whatnot. But the thing that really galvanized me and that really set in motion the series of events that led to where I am now is when I would go to court for these things, and I would see people that didn't look like me. I'm talking about people of color, lower income people that can't afford even the cheap $500 lawyer that I paid for myself, that my parents weren't willing to pay for, and go up in front of the judge on the same day for the same charges with the exact same criminal history. And I was seeing these kids get the book thrown at them. And because I had a lawyer and I had a suit on and my skin was white, I was getting a slap on the wrist. And these dudes are getting nailed with 6 months in jail, loss of license, et cetera, et cetera. And that is what really kind of set in motion my path towards, my current career. Because I was just I could not abide by that sort of disparity in sentencing. It didn't make any sense to me. It was patently unjust, And just because I might have had like a little bit more resources and I looked a little bit different than some of the other people like facing the exact same charges, I was getting preferential treatment. It just didn't sit right with me. And basically the day after I came home from court, the last time for getting busted for possession, I was like, I want to start a normal chapter. Uh, Turns out the school that I was at was not willing to allow me to start a normal chapter. So I just kept looking around for job opportunities in drug policy. And, shortly after I graduated, I found an internship opportunity at Marijuana Policy Project. Uh, Uprooted my whole life, moved down to DC with a backpack full of my clothes and a skateboard and a guitar, and had the promise of a $9 an hour paid internship, and never looked back. So then I spent 10 years at Marijuana Policy Project before moving on to National Cannabis Industry Association for a little bit less than 4 years, before finally moving to NORML, where I'm at now.
So it's not so uncommon what you experience, such as a university just outright denying opportunities for a cannabis, basically an extracurricular opportunities. They basically just shut you down right there at the school level, correct?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I could have started my own like non-official organization, but I didn't have the bandwidth or the wherewithal or the knowledge about exactly how to do that. But the administration of the school at that time was very, very solid on not allowing any sort of drug policy reform groups at all. And this was at a fairly progressive research school, Case Western Reserve.
And unfortunately, this still goes on today, as you are, in normal. I would say that this is still a reality. Yes.
100%. Yeah. I mean, we get complaints from folks trying to start student chapters all the time about interference from the school administration. And a couple of years ago, we actually had a successful lawsuit because I believe it was in Iowa. There was a local chapter that was trying to get up and running, and the administration was trying to shut them down or prevent them from like being able to do a lot of different activities and use the school logo in their like kind of normal chapter branded t-shirts and various other public facing materials, and they won that lawsuit with the help from our awesome brothers and sisters at the ACLU.
Right on. Well, good to know that we have friends in high places. With that, we'll roll over to Councilmember Peggy Jones. Councilmember Jones.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Morgan, for joining us this evening. With cannabis possibly being Scheduled 3, do you think it's best to stop there or go for complete descheduling, and why?
Schedule 3 is total BS. We need to deschedule cannabis and remove it from the schedule of controlled substances immediately. That's the only way that we're going to be able to remove the conflict between state and federal laws. It's the only way that we're going to be able to actually address the criminal justice issues that are inherent in federal prohibition. And Schedule 3 does none of that. Schedule 3 might allow a little bit more research. It will allow cannabis businesses to be able to avoid the 280E tax issue. It won't create a situation in which banks are more willing to work with cannabis businesses. It won't do anything in terms of consumer rights whatsoever. And it certainly won't impact state legal programs right now, either adult use or medical. And honestly, I think that there should be some concern with Schedule 3 because, admittedly, as of right now, the DOJ has been taking a hands-off approach to adult use and medical programs in various states. That could change with a change of administration and a change in staffing at the highest levels of some of these major enforcement organizations. If you're looking at Schedule 3 as now this is a drug that can be prescribed, the FDA has no history of approving whole plant drugs for prescription use. So even if that were to happen, the FDA would take years and would probably say, like, no, we're not going to approve whole plant cannabis for public consumption and for prescription. So, even if states wanted to get in line with federal policy, they wouldn't be able to without completely revamping themselves and destroying what we've already built over the last 25 years. Long story short, Schedule 3 is a good signal from the federal government that cannabis has medical value. But in terms of policy, it does basically nothing, with the exception of providing a tax break for businesses and a little bit more leeway for research. I don't think that it will really even do anything for federal employees in terms of being able to consume cannabis legally if it's legal in their states. The executive order that specifically refers to federal employment states that you're not allowed to consume Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 substances, and that you can be automatically terminated for a positive test for any of those. But the next line in that executive order defines illegal drugs as not counting things that are able to be legally prescribed. So I think there's some leeway there, not to mention the fact that most federal agencies have their own internal policies that are either cannabis specific and not related to the schedules whatsoever, or are much more intricate than the executive order. So, I think that even in terms of allowing federal employees to be able to consume cannabis legally without fear of termination or punishment, a rescheduling wouldn't even do that. So clearly, like, this is a good signal that we're moving in the right direction, but it does not go anywhere near where we want to go with it.
Councilmember Krawitz, you have a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. And it's so good to see you, Morgan. Thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight. And follow up to that, I almost, as a matter of apology and a question, the Veterans Action Council, it almost feels like, an apology is due, even though we're not supposed to do everything and not supposed to watch everything. I feel personally, and I know others in the council feel, that we sort of, let Kevin Sabet get by us with this federal Cannabis Research Act. And that's now been signed by the president, that now we don't know the full extent of the damage that Kevin Sabet has been able to do to our, ability to research cannabis. But we know that at least there are some aspects of that bill that will come up again that are now no longer tied to scheduling. So even if we reschedule to 3 or whatever, it may not solve some of our research issues because of the help of Kevin Sabet. So I guess just sort of as a request, part apology, but mostly a request to NORML to help us with that, help us go down that rabbit hole, help us figure out what Kevin Sabet did wrong, did damage to, and help us help you fix that when we get into Congress to do our descheduling bill.
Well, I mean, in terms of the bill that you're talking about, and I think that you're talking about like the only standalone cannabis policy reform legislation that's ever been passed by Congress and signed by the president. Pretty weak sauce. And honestly, like, you can look through like NORML's blogs. My colleague Paula Armentano like ripped that bill apart. It really doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, ostensibly, it requires a little bit more of a succinct timeline when it comes to approving both research and research production licenses, but there's really no teeth to it. I mean, I view that bill almost entirely as a symbolic bill, and it was all that we could get passed in the last Congress, unfortunately. So we're very much looking forward to building on that with more robust research bills, as well as bills that go beyond research, for veterans and otherwise. And I don't like to give Kevin any more shrift than he already has, but honestly, like, you can sense the desperation in those folks' voices, even through Twitter, X, or whatever. they take credit for things they had no part in. They completely obfuscate or misinterpret the data that's out there. They are just, it seems like they're getting more and more desperate, and the more desperate they get, the crazier their claims get.
Yes, that's nothing new or unexpected, but we just want to be there to capitalize on when they trip themselves up. But thank you for that. And all right, we'll continue on with our discussion. Council member Alex Popoff. Council member Popoff, you're recognized.
Thanks, Etienne, and thanks for joining us, Morgan. My question is, please tell us what your vision is with respect to international cannabis activism, and specifically, what is NORML like strategizing and doing towards that end? Thank you.
Well, I think that international is super important, and it's something that I've been personally trying to build up during my relatively short time at NORML, because there are very few organizations that are really looking at this on an international scale. Obviously we've got, bandwidth and resource issues like everybody else. So we need to concentrate on our own backyard first. That being said, NORML has always been an international organization, and currently I believe we have at least 3, maybe more international chapters. I know we've got like a New Zealand chapter, an Australia chapter. We've got a South Africa chapter. I think we've got one in Eastern Europe, and I would like to greatly expand that. That has to be done very carefully, though, because there are a lot of places where even being associated with NORML or with any sort of drug policy reform organization can get you thrown in fucking prison. And I don't want to like do that to anybody, or like amp somebody up to a point where they're going to be putting themselves at risk unless they totally understand what that risk is. That being said, as soon as we have the resources to start expanding that, and we're always welcome to like as many people getting involved as possible to help spread that message. We want to take this across the world. And there's also that weird sort of dynamic that the United States has been largely responsible for most of the drug war policies that exist throughout the world, both like at the UN as well as in individual member nations. And so I feel like, until we get the job done here, we've got a lot of explaining to do if we're going to other countries and being like, hey, like, let's work together to change drug policy in your country. And by the way, you might end up in a dark cell block because of that activism. So I think that that's something that has to be approached very, very carefully, but I think that it's something that absolutely needs to happen, and there's growing appetite for it, especially when you look at various EU member nations starting to pursue more sensible cannabis policies. We're talking about like Malta, Luxembourg, Germany, etc. And there being relatively little kickback from both the EU or the UN on this. Although the EU has kicked back a little bit harder than the UN has when it comes to like enacting actual substantive policies. But this is something that I want NORML to have a much bigger role in, if at the very least in an advisory position, just like providing them with the talking points and information that they need to be able to relay the message to their lawmakers and decision makers within whatever system of government these countries and these activists are operating under.
Councilmember Popoff, you have a follow-up.
Thank you. And that does mostly answer it. And I completely agree that while fortunately we have freedom of speech here with limitations in other countries, it's even more limited, or they don't even have the presumption of freedom of speech at all. And then throw drugs in the mix, it's even more of a thing where they could be inciting like chaos or something. There's completely different laws. But I was going to kind of wondering if you could speak to just briefly on what can we do to kind of ease that for those people, like at the UN, CND, or the World Health Organization level, where if we kind of put pressure in the right places there through these other member nations, or directly as a representative of the US, or not as a representative of the US, but coming from the US to the UN saying, hey, we'd like you to change the treaty so that we're not in the Stone Ages here. Because like we can change policy and go against the treaty and then Kevin Simbet can throw a Hail Mary lawsuit at, you know, they can sue they could sue us for even Schedule 3 potentially. So I'm just wondering what can be done, like, specifically to address those potential hiccups, if anything.
Well, I mean, your brother Michael knows much more about like the inner workings of the UN than I do. But what I can tell you from the grassroots perspective is that it is absolutely key to have member nations have grassroots organizations there that are willing to speak up and that are well organized and well informed. And I think that the key to building up that grassroots around the world is meeting people where they're at. You know, go out in search of people that are interested in changing cannabis policies within their own countries, not necessarily internationally, but just in their own countries that are still living under draconian prohibition policies. And then give them what they need and what they ask for, as opposed to trying to put like a blueprint stamp of like, this is how we did it, this is how you need to do it, because every country is going to be a little bit different. Yeah, in some cases a lot different. And you can't just say like, you know, what worked here is going to work there. So we all as activists need to be like receptive and responsive to the individual situational needs of activists in other countries outside of the US, and operate accordingly. You know, provide them with what they need, not what we want them to have.
Well, we will be there. Michael, myself, and Councilmember Landau will physically be on the ground there in Vienna. So come join us. You know, you don't need an invitation. You just got to show. So we'd love to have, as well as to communicate, introduce, as well as, you know, we're going to be having a side event ourselves. So we'll keep you posted on all that.
Please do.
All right. Next up will be Councilmember Wade Laughter. Councilmember Laughter.
Yes, thank you for joining us this evening, Morgan. I'd ask you to speak a little bit to the role of our traditional cannabis activist organizations, given the changes that have happened over the last few decades in the cannabis industry, specifically about reform. And me personally, I'm really interested in patient access. But yeah, what can our traditional activist organizations do, state and local?
Well, I mean, honestly, like we can keep doing everything that we have been doing for decades. You know, talking to our lawmakers, showing up at meetings, showing up at hearings, you know, organizing people, getting more people involved, getting people registered to vote. That's a biggie. And you know, it's unfortunate because over the last 15 years, I've seen like, you know, the funding for organizations that support the grassroots just dwindle steadily. You know, the big philanthropic donors, both progressive and like more libertarian leaning, have mostly dried up. You know, the average person that wants to support cannabis policy reform is facing you know, more and more personal economic hardship as the years go by. And you know, even industry money is getting pretty thin, and you know, because of all the problems that they have with taxation and with just a general operating costs and whatnot. And even then, when they can give it, it usually comes with strings attached, and that's a really big problem. And so, I mean, the effectiveness of all of these organizations, whether they be big or small, is just you know, being really hurt by lack of resources. But the biggest resource that anybody have is people. You know, so the best thing that we can do as activists and as advocates is to just continue doing what we have been doing and get people involved and try to maintain organizational cohesion, so that we're all, you know, obviously I hate using the phrase, you know, rowing in the same direction, because you know, everybody's going to have a little bit of differences, but as long as we're all still talking and working on the same issues, we can get most of what we all want to get done accomplished. It just might take a really long time.
That is true. All right. Next up will be Councilmember Al Byrne. Councilmember Byrne.
Morgan, thank you for being here. As an ex-employee of NORML, I wish you well. I hope you have a wonderful career. I didn't write this question, and I'm going to ask you, but I want people to understand there's a word in here that I find interesting. It's called the checkered history of NORML, which indicates an up and down sort of black and white thing. And I was involved in a lot of that back in the 90s. And I think that's a decent word. You know, NORML has had its good moments and its bad, and a lot of both. But I want people to understand historically, NORML, for whatever you might think of it and wherever it sits right now, is absolutely responsible for the war on drugs having not one enemy, being legalization, but having three enemies: legalization, hemp, and medical. If it wasn't for the NORML organization, those three diversions of the federal energy would never have occurred. So checkered history, yeah. But, you know, when you got to put it all together and you look at it over the decades, it's a damn good history. So anyway, Morgan, given the checkered history of national NORML, what might be different in the future? Given the history again, they're taking you back in time, and I know you've only been there a little while, but the history of NORML and activism. Do your best.
Well, look, I've worked for like three of the biggest organizations in cannabis policy reform. And I can tell you they've all had their problems and they've all had checkered histories. And, you know, some of the, you know, those issues and, you know, the issues that folks have had with those organizations over the years have been well-deserved. Some of them not so much. And, you know, the bottom line is that, you know, I am focused on the future. And, you know, whatever, you know, may have happened in the past is, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the past. You know, we have a lot of opportunities going forward right now. And one of the things that I personally pride myself on is in being able to build bridges and work in coalition efforts with other organizations. For example, the Marijuana Justice Coalition, which is made up of probably 36 at this point, various organizations ranging from, you know, immigration groups to, you know, drug policy groups like NORML. You know, I think that, you know, a lot of these things that have happened in the past have been like really just you know, personality issues or the disagreements about like minutia of policy. But all of that aside, that's not what I'm concerned with. What I'm concerned with is what we're going to do tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
Good answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I agree with the history that it's had. You know, people ask, you know, what has NORML done, et cetera, et cetera. If anything, it's been a great clearinghouse for good activists to find a way to try to do good things. And it's been a good steward organization. And some of the information that you're putting together, we're working on an Operation Wisconsin. We're going to try to go in and affect things and use our influence to help our veterans get access there. And the tools that you have and have access and have created there at NORML have been very helpful in us narrowing down our enemies to go after specifically, so that we can do specific targeting and name and shame some of these people and hopefully bring about some change. So your good work that you do currently is helping us do our good work currently. So, you know, when people ask those questions, I don't think they realize the depths of how things have gone and how things go. So thank you for being a good steward.
Yeah, and I really need to just stress that like no law has passed regarding cannabis policy reform solely based on one single organization, not a single one. It is a group effort. And it takes everybody from like the national organizations to the middlemen to the grassroots folks to like strange bedfellows in terms of coalitions at the state level. Not even MPP, which in some cases has like completely bankrolled ballot initiatives and put their own staff on initiatives full time. They can't even claim full responsibility for the passage of bills because they were working with local advocates. So none of this, like no single organization can claim responsibility for any single law that has passed. This is a group effort, and we either get things done together or we get nothing done together.
Great points. Thank you very much for that as well. Michael Crowitz, you have our next question, council member.
So before I ask the question, I want to take the liberty to go down a stroll of artifacts for a second. And before I show you this, I want to show you something and see if you recognize this logo that I dragged home with me on one of my adventures. But it just reminds me, I was very enthralled with this one logo. I found a really particularly nice example of a 1970s belt buckle with the NORML logo. There was a square logo with the outside edge, that said legalize it. And I gave it to Alan St. Pierre when he was your executive director of NORML. And he was so enthralled by my exuberance about that buckle that it just so happened at that moment the patent was sitting on his desk. Talk about a strange world, small world. But he, based on my enthusiasm, kept the patent. I don't know if you still have it, but he kept the patent, at least for then, on that 1970s really cool logo. So anyway, take a look at this and tell me if you recognize this logo off the top of your head.
I mean, it looks pretty old school. Is that New Zealand or is that Arizona?
South Africa.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, and that was, Jules gave me that when I was on my trip to South Africa a few years back. Bless his soul. So, but anyway, the question I have, and before I ask the question, I'll say this. I think one of the most important jobs that NORML has done over the years, from my sort of inside the bubble view, has not been really heralded at all. And that is what I call answering the phone for the cannabis movement. I mean, every single day, almost at every given hour, there's some little newspaper or magazine or major media, for that matter, somewhere wanting to get NORML to answer a question. And if they weren't there to answer the question, a lot of those would go empty. We're getting like, I don't know how, if you added up Alan St. Pierre was also good at figuring out the market value of NORML's brand and stuff, but I remember doing an assessment of the earned media that NORML got from these interviews, these tangential little interviews that might not even mention NORML, but spotlights what they learned by talking to NORML. But anyway, the question we're going to ask relates to that, that this, over the years, I've noticed at times it's better or worse that the gatekeeper function that's connected to that really works well sometimes and better than others, where it connects folks to, somebody calls and says, oh, there's some veteran in Wisconsin that wants to do something on cannabis for medicine. Oh, well, we know a veterans group, and you connect. And Veterans Action Council really just wants to know how we can get, we never really asked, and we've just been sort of over the years good and better and less good and better, different sort of channels of communication. I honestly have never asked this question before of anybody, but I'll ask it of you. How can we improve that? How can we solidify that? How can we make it a really good, solid connection so that NORML knows when to reach out to us for help?
Oh, I mean, honestly, I don't get a lot of questions about the veteran angle. And whenever I do, I make sure to send them to either you or Eric Gopal. Honestly, like, I wish that there were a whole lot more. And I think that there are a lot of ways that we can generate a whole lot more questions regarding the veteran angle. And, I'm happy to talk about some ways offline about how we can start spreading that around to, veteran specific media outlets. But I mean, I think that that's one of the things that I've always prided myself, regardless of what organization I'm working at. Like, I always answer the phone. Or I'll get back to people as soon as possible, even if it's just somebody like asking about like, oh, hey, I might have to take a drug test. Can you give me some information? Or if it's like, somebody that just wants to share their ideas or share their story, I make it a point to always get back to them, because this is what we're doing this for. It's people. And, when it comes to media, though, I mean, I came up predominantly focusing on media. You know, at MPP and at NCIA, my role was predominantly in media relations. And since moving to NORML, I've taken on the mantle of you know, federal lobbying, but I still do a lot of media. And between me and Paul Armentano, we make sure to get back to every single reporter the second they get to us, one way or another, and make sure that they have our quotes, whether they use them or not. And I think that that's an important thing to give, like, you know, grassroots advocates the knowledge of, like, you got to keep checking your email, because if you get that request, you've got to be on it immediately. And reporters have deadlines, you know, and if you don't get back to them immediately, they're going to move on to somebody else. So always make sure to be checking your email if there's something going on. And also, by the way, if anybody wants any sort of media training, my door is always open. Just email me at morgan@norml.org, and I will be happy to help them with both like media outreach as well as media reactiveness.
Councilmember Kravitz, you had a follow up.
Yeah, I just want to follow up first to two-part. First is to extend thanks and renew our commitment to the rare occasion that Veterans Action Council actually took it upon ourselves to send out accommodation to Dale Geringer and Ellen Comp, California NORML. And on what you were just talking about, give our love and admiration, respect to Paul. He's really, like, more than just answering the phone. He's like the one person that's diligently, accurately answering the BS that comes out of the opposition on a routine basis for the entire movement. And that's very, very deeply appreciated. On the media side, I caught his interview on CNN that he did the other day, and you know, put right in the hot seat. You know, he's got like 2 minutes. Here, explain everything you know about cannabis. Oh yeah, and what about scheduling? Oh yeah, you know, it's like it's very difficult hot seat that they put him in on there. It's very admirable, you know, his ability to navigate that and put out very effective talking points and truth and evidence. So really appreciate it.
It is an absolute joy getting to work with Paul Armentano. That guy is amazing, and he makes my job so much easier.
Oh, Paul's one of those heroes. In fact, Al's telling us one of the last things he did at NORML was hire Paul. So, you know, probably the best hire he ever did, because Paul has been nothing but an unsung hero doing the necessary. And we can't thank you enough for your continued dedication to cannabis reform, as well as, you know, doing the dirty work. You know, talking to the media is something that nobody likes to do. And it's hard to get and maintain those media contacts, but I commend y'all for consistently being there and educating them, because that is not an easy job. That is without its own set of frustrations, and yeah, drives you a little crazy, needless to say.
While we're on the subject of unsung heroes, I want to give a little bit of a shout out to Karen O'Keefe at MPP. She is just amazing, and is like more responsible for cannabis policy reform than I think anybody realizes.
Agreed. And we should definitely have her on it sometime and talk to her and get her perspective of things. All right. Well, Morgan, that's our questions for you, sir. We were able to get you in time so you can go back and be a good dad. But thank you for taking the time this evening and sharing this conversation with us. If you have anything else going on or something that's coming up, here's your time to plug anything if you have something coming up for NORML.
Well, thank you very, very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And, you know, happy to talk to y'all anytime. I do want to give you all a little bit of a heads up of something that I just got confirmation of this afternoon before jumping on here, is that we're looking at a September 20th markup of the Cure Act in the House Oversight Committee. This is a bill that would remove past cannabis use entirely as a disqualifier for federal employment or for security clearances. As written, it would also exempt current cannabis use, but I'm very concerned that that will get watered down in markup. So contact your members of Congress, particularly if they're on the oversight committee, and tell them to support the Cure Act with current use provisions.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thanks again, Morgan Fox, for joining us this evening for our V.A.C. roundtable. I would like to thank council members Alex Popoff, Wade Laughter, Peggy Jones, Nate Landau, Michael Crowitz, Al Byrne, myself, I'm Etienne Fontaine. Can't thank you enough again, Morgan, for joining us tonight and setting a little bit of the record straight for people as you continue your hard work. And we wish you great success, and we'll stay in contact, and you do the same.
Absolute pleasure. Onward and upward.
Onward and upward. Thanks again. All right, everybody. Thank you much for joining us for V.A.C. Roundtable number 61. Morgan Fox. Y'all have a great rest of your week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with our next V.A.C. Roundtable number 62. Thank you, everybody. And